And welcome back to For Such a Time as This. I am your host, Pastor James Pittman. Okay, we're going to deal with an issue here that is pretty hot on the press in evangelicalism, in the evangelical world, and it has to do with the Harvest Bible Chapel and the issues that are taking place there. I guess an insider to the Harvest Empire, Mancow Mueller, penned an article in the Daily Herald, a local Chicago area newspaper. He's in a circle, and it made a lot of news. And I'll just read a little bit of it. Mancow Mueller, he speaks of personal issues and personal times, and then he ends towards the end of the article. He says this. He says, "I would have asked some questions of Pastor James McDonald and the leadership if they would listen." And here's the first one. He would ask if they would listen. Why is Harvest $42 million in debt, as the church stated on its own website? I've seen some up closer to 70, but at least on their website, that's what he says. And then he says this: Pastor James and a fundraising campaign called Closer asked me to donate $3 million just recently, and an awful lot of what's going on at Harvest seems to revolve around money. The mismanagement of it, the lying about it, the lying about extravagant houses, the hiding of salaries. Not good. And it'll play itself out. Who knows what the truth is? But they've admitted enough stuff to the point to where it's a lot of smoke. Has to be at least some fire. But I want to look at it from a different perspective. Here's the perspective I want to look at it from. Let's look at it from a 1 Corinthians chapter 9 view. When Paul was in a battle over the soul of the Corinthian church, he goes to the Corinthians and he says, "Look, let me show you what it's like to be a real apostle and a real man of God." And he starts off 1 Corinthians 9, he says this: "Am I not free?" Paul says, "Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Or not you my workmanship in the Lord?" And then in verse 3 he says, "This is my defense to those who would examine me," as Paul is arguing against the false teachers that have infiltrated the Corinthian church. He says, "This is my defense." Look at the defense that Paul uses. He says this. Drop down in verse 7 and 8. He says, "Who serves as a soldier at his own expense?" It's a rhetorical question. None of them. "Who plants a vineyard without eating any of its fruit?" Again, rhetorical. Nobody. "Or who tends a flock without getting some of the milk?" Again, no one. "Do I say these things on human authority? No. Does not the law even say the same?" And then he talks about an ox, do not muzzle an ox while it is threshing. That, yes, if you are part of the gospel, you have a right. You have a legal, ethical, divine right to engage in some of what's coming from the ministry. But then look at his argument here. He says this: "If others share this rightful claim on you, do not we even more? Nevertheless, we have not made use of this right, but we endure anything rather than put an obstacle in the way of the gospel of Christ." Let me say that again. Yes, we have the right to receive money from the ministry. Nevertheless, we have not made use of this right, but we endure anything rather than put an obstacle in the way of the gospel of Christ. We will endure what we have to endure. We will go without. Paul's argument, the false teachers and the false apostles will use you for your money, so that we can be sure that you do not have any doubt why we do what we do. We will forego that right. We will not engage in what other people do. We will not use you for your money. We will not put an obstacle. in the way of the gospel. We won't do it. We have the right, yes, but because the gospel is so dear to us, we won't have it marred by money, which brings us back to harvest. Money is not only an obstacle from what I can read. It's not only an obstacle, it's a pyramid. It's a mountain. It's a monstrosity. It seems like everything I read about harvest, it's money. If this is true that Pastor James asked Mueller to donate $3 million, and then it went down to $1 million, and then it said sell your memorabilia and then give it to the church, he then says, why don't you go ahead, Pastor James, Mueller says in the article, why don't you go ahead and buy a house in Naples, and then when you die, leave it to the church. Unbelievable if that's true. That is horrid if true. That is more than an obstacle. It's a monstrosity. And if it is true, then Harvest has a lot to answer for. We'll see how this plays out. But any ministry, any minister who is willing to put money in the face of the people he's ministering to, and to let it be an obstacle, that's a problem. That is a problem. Oh, this is bad for a black eye on the Church of Christ.